Learning to read a new language can be difficult and stressful, but with the right tools, a lot of that stress can be removed. So today I'm going to be introducing you to 5 tools that can help you get better at reading Japanese. I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Satori Reader. They're the first sponsor I've ever accepted because I refuse to accept sponsorship offers unless I already use and love the product. Satori Reader, as I'm sure some of you know, I absolutely adore, so I'm super excited to be able to work with them. If you just want to check out what Satori Reader is right now, there's a link down in the description. There's actually a sale going on if you're watching on the first day or two of this video for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, so check them out. So let's get started. A lot of you are here because, well, you come to my Genki lessons. But what you might not know is that in the back of the Genki books, there are actually reading sections for every single lesson. For your first experiences reading Japanese, I strongly suggest giving these a shot. Before reading these sections, take a look at the extra vocabulary that is included with them. This is vocabulary that isn't included in the lesson or in previous lessons and will be showing up in the story. Something that you can do is add these to an Anki deck. Next, you're going to go ahead and read through the story one time. After this, you can take those new words that you don't know yet, take the sentences from that story you just read and add them to the cards in your Anki deck. Review those vocabulary words along with the sentences for a few days, and then read the story again to see if you understand it more. Next, go ahead and go through the questions that are related to this story, and if you feel like you've got it down, you can move on to the next lesson. I do strongly recommend coming back and reading these stories again, even after you've moved on to later lessons, because it's great review and you can see your progress this way. A story you might have had a really difficult time with in lesson 3 might make a lot of sense when you're finished with the lesson 7. The next type of tool you can use to get better at reading Japanese are graded readers. Now, graded readers are generally very expensive, but there's actually a free PDF with over 900 pages of graded reading material available online. I'll leave a link to that down in the description. But before we really get into this, we need to talk about a concept called intensive reading versus extensive reading. Now, intensive reading is when you go through a story or a piece of reading material and look up every single word and grammar point that you don't know. Now, this is a great way to pick up new vocabulary, but it can be very tedious. It's much more like studying than actually enjoying what you're reading. Extensive reading is reading something without worrying about looking up words that you already know, or at least looking them up minimally. The best type of material you can use for extensive reading is stuff that's around your level. That's what graded reading material is great for. Generally, you'll read through a story without looking up any of the words that you don't know because you should be able to pick them up from context. And if you can't, maybe that level of graded reading material is too high of a level for you and you should drop down a level. Now, this 900-page PDF has graded reading material of all different levels, so you can check out which is best for you. So go ahead and read through this PDF as much as you can, and when you hit a wall, you can either consider adding vocabulary to Anki and studying that vocabulary, or moving on to a different story and coming back later. If you do add the vocabulary that you find in these stories to something like an Anki deck or flashcards that you make on your own, please consider adding the sentences that they showed up with as well so that you can get those words in context. And this actually hits on an important point. One of the main reasons that reading is a great way to improve your ability in a new language is that seeing new words in context helps you understand their meaning and usage much more than seeing those words all alone. Most people tend to study new vocabulary on their own, maybe on flashcards or whatever, but if you don't see what they look like in context or how they're actually used, it can be very hard to use them yourself. If you see the same word multiple times in context, you'll be able to use it better when it comes time to use it. You'll also start to pick up extra meanings that that word might have beyond the first listing in the dictionary. Which brings us to the third tool in this list, the sponsor of this video, Satori Reader. Satori Reader is both an app and a website. Both the app and the website seem to have the exact same features. Now, I believe that Satori Reader is sort of the missing link between graded reading material and native reading material. Now, there's a free version of Satori Reader which has about 2 articles from each of the 24 series available for you to check out. But I'm pretty convinced that after you check out those articles, you're going to want to move on to the full version, which has over 700 individual articles aimed at Japanese learners. Now, when you jump into the series, you'll see that some of the individual articles actually have easy and harder versions, and some have different audio versions with just voices and some with sound effects. Every single article on Satori Reader does have audio files included with it. You can listen to individual sentences or you can listen to the entire story. A great way to use this is to listen once, read through the story on your own, then read along with the audio file, and then listen again to see if you can pick up everything going on. You can also use it to shadow. Every single word within articles is clickable and you'll get a definition of that word. Now, the definition isn't the full dictionary definition that's pages long for some words. It's the one that sort of applies to this context. Sometimes there's some extra definitions that may apply as well, but the definitions are usually applicable in this context. You'll also see that at the end of every single sentence, you can click a little button that gives you the English translation of the sentence. You can also get definitions for new phrases and idioms, so it's not just word by word. If there's new grammar or difficult concepts introduced within the story, you can actually click on those sentences and get full, detailed explanations of those entire sentences. Now, the next feature is something that makes Satori Reader extremely unique and something I really love about it, and that is that you can customize your entire experience based on the number of kanji that you know. You can choose those numbers by adding them individually yourself, linking your WaniKani account so that only kanji you've studied on WaniKani will show up, choosing from levels of Joyo kanji or from certain textbooks. So then from the preferences or from within individual articles, you can choose to see furigana for kanji you don't know, to only see kanji that you know, or to see all kanji, or to see just hiragana. So basically you can customize every single article based on the kanji that you know. Finally, you can add any word or phrase to a review deck which is connected to the stories you found them in. So if you add a new word to your deck and you go to review it, you can actually click on a button within that card to go directly to the sentence in the story you were reading it in. The sentence you added the word from is also here available on the card, as well as any sentence that you've added from other stories. And there's more features coming soon to the review system, which will make it even easier to review. So even though I'm reading native material right now, for the most part, I still use Satori Reader on almost a daily basis for extensive reading material. Now, most of you will want to be using it for intensive reading material. So while there are different difficulty levels available, for example, Human Japanese Extra Credit is basically just sentences that introduce different types of grammar, and then dialogues have conversations between people, and then there's a few stories that are available that are actually quite low level and will be good for sort of upper beginner, very low intermediate. Most of the stories though are based somewhere around lower to mid intermediate levels. Now, if you're a lower level than that, obviously you can still use these stories, but it'll be more of an intensive experience. If you're intermediate or above, you can use a lot of the content for extensive reading material. So here are 3 possible approaches you could use when using Satori Reader. So the first approach I could suggest is scanning through a new article, adding any words to the review deck that you don't recognize, and then going and reviewing those for about a week until you feel like you have a grasp for those words. Then go back and read the entire article and see if you understand it. If you don't, review those words for a couple more days, come back and read it again. The second approach is to read one article, add any words you don't know, review those words for a few days, then come back and read the article again and see if you understand it more. Then move on to a new story. The third approach, which would be more of an extensive approach, is just reading through as many stories as you want. Adding words you don't know, you don't necessarily have to add all of them. I don't add all of them. If there's a word that I think is going to show up quite a bit, which these words do show up quite a bit, Satori Reader likes to repeat new words that show up in following articles, so you will see them again. So if a word is like, I can kind of understand the meaning, and I feel like if I see it a few more times, I'll get how it's used, I won't add it to my deck. But if it's a completely new word that I had no idea of the meaning even from context, I always add it to a review. So you read through an article, add a couple words to your review deck, move on to the next article, keep adding words to your review deck, and on and on and on. When your reviews start to pile up too much though, you should probably take a break, go through, review all of your words, before moving on to new stories. Now, one thing I've heard of people doing is adding every single word in the story to a new deck, and that's gonna overwhelm you really quickly. So do not do that. If you have to add every single word in a new story to a deck, you're probably not ready for that story yet. So try and find a story somewhere in Satori Reader, there's 720 of them, that is a little bit more level appropriate. Come back when you know some more vocabulary. Maybe you need to go back and look at a textbook and memorize some vocabulary before you jump into these stories. So that's Satori Reader. If you read all of the stories on this app, you should be ready to jump into native material, no problem. I personally noticed after reading the series Hole in the Wall, a bunch of new words I picked up there showing up in Harry Potter, which I was also reading at the same time. So the next tool that I feel like is really indispensable for learners, it's not absolutely necessary, but I wouldn't want to be reading Japanese without it, it's my Kindle. Just like in Satori Reader, you can touch words and get the definitions, though not necessarily in context. It's full dictionary definitions, either Japanese to Japanese or Japanese to English. Once again, the Japanese to English dictionary isn't perfect, but it gets the job done. Kindle also adds all the words you look up into a study list. Now, the review system on Kindle is garbage, but you can use an app like KindleMate to transfer all those words into an Anki deck. You can take two approaches when reading native material. Once again, extensive or intensive. I suggest having one book for extensive reading and one book for intensive reading. Pick something that's a little bit above your level for intensive reading, and then something that is right around your level, maybe a little bit too high because it is native material. Probably everything will be a little bit too high level in the beginning to just enjoy reading and not having to look up every single word that you don't know. Some books that I could recommend in the beginning are the Magic Treehouse series. It's not super excited, it's aimed at kids, and it's actually a translation of a book that was written in English. I actually found them quite useful though when I started reading Japanese because they have lots of like onomatopoeia and stuff that you don't usually get in translations of English books. The next thing you could consider taking a look at are the books available on the Iwanami Shounen Bunko. These are books that are aimed at elementary to middle school students, and they range from classic English books to classic Japanese books, and there's even more modern stuff available too. If you take a look at the books available on Amazon, you can actually see what age group they're aimed at. Aim for the low end in the beginning. I'm currently reading the Chronicles of Narnia on my Kindle from this publisher. Either after or even before you start reading these books, I recommend checking out Majou no Takyubin, which is Kiki's delivery service. It's slightly challenging even for my level, but it has low enough level vocabulary and grammar that pretty much anyone who's finished, say, all of Satori Reader should be able to follow. Another author I've been enjoying lately is Kashiwaba Sachiko. These books are a step up from Majou no Takyubin, but I really enjoyed the writing style and the stories that she had to tell. The final tool we need to talk about is manga. Now, manga is different from regular books. Japanese people that love manga often don't enjoy reading books, and vice versa. That's because the language in manga is going to be a little bit different from what you see in books. Manga it's just the dialogue. The story around the dialogue is told through pictures. In some ways, this makes it a little bit easier to get into, but in other ways, the dialogue included can be very removed from real life. For example, if you're reading a fantasy manga or some kind of sci-fi manga, a lot of the vocabulary isn't stuff that you're going to be seeing in regular life when you go out to get something from the convenience store. But if your goal is just to read manga, you should probably get started with reading manga. With that said, reading books and reading things like Satori Reader will help you get better at reading manga as well, because hey, books include dialogue as well. One thing you could check out if you're still at a very low level is the manga Crystal Hunters, which is a manga that's been created for absolute beginners of Japanese. The Japanese included, I don't love it, but if you're just starting out, it might be something you could take a look at. So two manga that are pretty good if you're at an upper beginner, lower intermediate level are Yotsuba to, which is the story of a Japanese kindergartner who just goes around doing funny things in life, and a lot of the vocabulary is actually quite applicable, for example, if you want to be a teacher in Japan. The next one is Nichijo. While there are some fantastic elements to Nichijo, as the name implies, a lot of stuff going on in this story is just day-to-day life. So it can be very applicable if you want to learn stuff about daily life in Japan.